Yes, I think that my colleague on the other side of the aisle just confirmed why this amendment is necessary and why the REINS Act is so important. What I believe I heard him say is that because it's difficult for the administration to determine what the cost of these regulations are, they shouldn't have to make any determination at all. And there should be no oversight whatsoever, either from OIRA or OMB, because it's just too doggone difficult to figure out how much these regulations are going to cost. Frankly, I find that argument absolutely and completely absurd.
We have delegated the power to make specific rules to agencies who are staffed by thousands of experts in each particular field. That's why the REINS Act is so pernicious, because it would stop this. It would make us make those decisions, and we have no competence to make those decisions.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Congress Lens. I'm Audrey, and if that clip you just watched caught your attention, you're definitely not alone. In this hearing, Harriet Hageman goes head-to-head with Jerry Nadler over regulatory oversight and the REINS Act. What stood out right away was how direct Hageman was when responding to Nadler's argument that estimating regulatory costs is simply too difficult. Hageman completely flips that logic, and that is where the debate really starts to get interesting. The big question here is pretty simple. If regulations can cost millions or even billions of dollars, should someone be required to at least try to measure that impact? That tension is exactly what you are about to see unfold in this debate. In my opinion, this moment highlights a bigger issue about accountability in government. Hagaman argues that Congress should not just hand over sweeping power to agencies without oversight. Nadler pushes back by saying Congress does not have the expertise to make those decisions. In this video we are going to break down what happened, why Hagaman's argument hit so hard in that exchange, and what it means for how regulations are created in Washington. Before we jump into the reaction, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Congress Lens, and turn on notifications so you do not miss our breakdowns of the most intense moments happening inside Congress. Alright, let's get into it.
I am proud to be a co-sponsor of the REINS Act, which is an important effort to ensure Congress reclaims its rightful authority and responsibility to legislate. This amendment is technical in nature, but it is important nonetheless. In April of this year, the Biden administration issued an executive order on modernizing the regulatory review. The purpose of this executive order is to allow the administration to implement their agenda more quickly and efficiently. The executive order also raises the threshold for centralized review by the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, or OIRA, from $150 million to $200 million. The order also gives the administrator of OIRA a discretionary role in determining which regulations are considered for full OIRA review. OIRA serves as a responsible check on major regulations, reviewing the costs and benefits of each regulation and ensuring that all public comments have been reviewed and considered before the regulation goes into effect. OIRA, in other words, is a check on due diligence. This order will mean that fewer rules are reviewed by OIRA, and thus less due diligence will be conducted over the administrative state. So long as this executive order stands, a loophole will exist in the REINS Act. Fewer rules will be classified as major and consequently would not be subject to congressional approval under the REINS Act. My amendment would close this loophole by clarifying that OIRA must issue a finding of the full cost-benefit analysis of each rule and issue a determination as major or minor according to that finding. I urge the adoption of my amendment, and I yield back and reserve my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service has previously noted that estimating the total cost of regulations is inherently difficult, and that such estimates of the cost of regulation should be viewed with a great deal of caution. Like the OMB, CRS has noted that there are significant methodological challenges to estimating and aggregating the total costs and benefits of rules. I rise in opposition to this amendment as it requires the OMB to make a specific determination of a rule's impact, when they already say it's difficult to make an estimate of the impact. This amendment requires the OMB to do the impossible, to make a specific finding when OMB and CRS already said that even estimates are very difficult and inherently unreliable. To request a finding is to request the impossible, and therefore I oppose this amendment. I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman is recognized.
Yes, I think that my colleague on the other side of the aisle just confirmed why this amendment is necessary and why the REINS Act is so important. What I believe I heard him say is that because it's difficult for the administration to determine what the cost of these regulations are, they shouldn't have to make any determination at all. And there should be no oversight whatsoever, either from OIRA or OMB, because it's just too doggone difficult to figure out how much these regulations are going to cost. Frankly, I find that argument absolutely and completely absurd. We're talking about tax money. We're talking about a cost and expense that is being imposed against our small businesses, our mom and pop businesses, against our industry groups. And what the gentleman from the other side is saying is that nobody, including this administration, should ever have to disclose what the cost of those regulations are. That is exactly the reason as to why we need a robust review by OIRA as provided for in this amendment. And I reserve my additional time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman reserves.
The gentleman reserves.
Gentlewoman from Wyoming.
Gentlewoman from Wyoming.
Yes, I do think that it's clear that it is important to make this technical change for the REINS Act. It is important that we have an understanding as to what the cost of these regulations will be. The very purpose of the REINS Act is to ensure that Congress is part of the legislative process for any regulation that would have an economic impact of over $100 million. Without a robust review by OIRA, it's not possible to determine which of these regulations, in fact, would fit within that category. It's for that reason that I request the adoption of this amendment. It is a good one for the REINS Act, and it ensures that we close an important loophole to make sure that it is the Congress that is legislating and not the executive branch and unelected bureaucrats. With that, I yield.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've expressed my opposition to the entire REINS Act because, as I said before, we are not competent. Congress cannot possibly decide how many parts per billion of arsenic is safe in the air for people to breathe, or how many rads of radiation it is safe to have in X-rays before it causes cancer. We don't know that. That is why we write general laws, and we have written in those laws, we have delegated the power to make specific rules to agencies who are staffed by thousands of experts in each particular field. That's why the REINS Act is so pernicious, because it would stop this. It would make us make those decisions, and we have no competence to make those decisions. The REINS Act is bad enough, but this amendment, which says that the OIRA must issue a finding for each rule determining whether the rule has a significant economic impact, given that OMB and CRS have both said that it is very difficult to make even estimates, you can't make a finding. A finding implies exactitude. Given the fact that even the estimates are very difficult and unreliable, a finding is impossible. An amendment should not require that someone do the impossible, and therefore I oppose the amendment, and I yield back.
The question is...
Now that we have watched the full exchange, I have to say this was one of those hearings where the disagreement really showed two very different views of how government should work. Harriet Hageman is arguing for accountability and transparency when it comes to federal regulations. The amendment Hagaman proposed is actually pretty technical, but the idea behind it is straightforward. Hagaman wants the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, often called OIRA, to clearly determine the cost impact of regulations before they take effect. The reason Hagaman says this matters is because of the recent executive order from Joe Biden that raised the review threshold from $150 million to $200 million. According to Hagaman, that change means fewer regulations get serious scrutiny, which could allow major rules to move forward without Congress really examining them. From my perspective, that is a legitimate concern. Regulations can have a huge impact on small businesses, industries, and taxpayers. Asking for a cost-benefit analysis before those rules take effect does not sound unreasonable. On the other side, Jerry Nadler pushes back with a very different argument. Nadler says calculating the exact economic impact of regulations is extremely difficult. Nadler points to analysis from the Congressional Research Service and the Office of Management and Budget, saying even estimates can be unreliable. But this is where the clash really happens. Nadler's argument basically comes down to this. Because these calculations are difficult, agencies should not be required to make firm findings. That is exactly what triggered Hagaman's response. When Hagaman mocked the idea that regulators should not even attempt to determine costs because it is too doggone difficult, that moment stood out. It highlighted what many people watching might already be thinking. Government regulations can carry massive financial consequences. Saying the costs are too complicated to measure can sound like avoiding accountability. Another point Hagaman makes that resonates with a lot of people is the role of Congress itself. Hagaman stresses that law-making authority belongs to Congress, not unelected bureaucrats inside federal agencies. That is really the heart of the REINS Act. The act would require Congress to approve major regulations that have large economic impacts. Hagaman argues that if a rule affects the economy at that scale, elected representatives should be involved in the final decision. Now Nadler responds by saying Congress does not have the technical expertise to determine things like safe radiation levels or chemical thresholds. Nadler's point is that agencies hire scientists and specialists who understand those issues. That is a fair point in theory. Agencies do have experts. But Hagaman's argument is not really about replacing experts. It is about ensuring oversight when regulations carry huge economic consequences. Experts can design the rules, but Congress should still have a say when those rules reshape entire industries. That is why Hagaman's response felt so sharp in this exchange. Instead of getting lost in technical language, Hagaman framed the issue in plain terms. If regulations cost money and affect businesses and taxpayers, someone should be responsible for measuring those costs and explaining them. That is not an unreasonable expectation. In fact, many people would say that is exactly what oversight is supposed to look like. So whether someone agrees with the REINS Act or not, Hagaman's argument in this moment was clear and politically effective. But I want to hear from you. Do you agree with Harriet Hageman that Congress should have more control over major regulations? Or do you think Jerry Nadler is right that technical decisions should mostly stay with federal agencies? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoy breaking down moments like this from Capitol Hill, make sure you subscribe to Congress Lens. I'm Audrey, and I will see you in the next one.